Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something that's felt, well, pretty stubbornly opaque for a long time in India: transparency within the judiciary.
Right. Specifically, this whole push for judges to declare their assets publicly.
Exactly. We've spent some time digging through, the various perspectives, the history, the numbers, basically trying to piece together this complex picture.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. And our mission today is really to help you understand why this is such a flashpoint right now, why it definitely matters to you, and what all this information tells us about, well, the state of trust in India's justice system.
Yeah, it feels a bit like trying to read a book with missing pages, doesn't it? And we're hoping to fill in some of those gaps.
So let's start with the core problem. This feeling that public trust in the Indian judiciary, it's a bit shaky.
Hmm.
Mm.
Shaky might be putting it mildly sometimes. There's this background noise, Years of whispers about potential misconduct, these nagging allegations of corruption that pop up.
And controversies that just seem to swirl around. It creates this real sense of unease. Makes people wonder.
It does. And sometimes one specific event just crystallizes everything. Like those reports back in 2025 involving Justice Yashwant Varma of the Delhi High Court.
Oh, right. The burnt currency thing.
Exactly. That detail about burnt currency reportedly found at his residence.
Yeah.
It just stuck with people. It was unsettling.
Yeah, burned currency. It's such a jarring image, so far from, the solemn idea of justice. It really makes you stop and think, okay, what else might be going on behind the scenes?
And that's the crucial question it throws up, isn't it?
Yeah.
The judiciary holds everyone else accountable. Politicians, bureaucrats, you name it.
Right, your neighbor even.
But who holds the judges accountable? Especially when something like that happens. Right now, it feels like that piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Which doesn't quite fit.
There have been steps, okay? Like the Supreme Court's move in April 2025. They allowed voluntary asset disclosures.
Voluntary. That's the key word there.
Yeah, voluntary sounds okay. But what does it actually mean on the ground?
Well, let's look at the figures. As things stand, only 24 out of 33 Supreme Court judges have actually publicly disclosed their assets under this voluntary system.
Okay, so not everyone. Better than nothing, maybe, but...
But then you look at the high courts, and it's much worse. Out of 770 high court judges across the country, only 97 have disclosed.
97 out of 770. Wait, that's what, about 12, 13%?
Roughly 12.6%, yeah.
It's stark.
Wow, if transparency was a school subject, that's not a passing grade.
Not even close.
Yeah.
And look, this isn't just about finding the odd instance of wrongdoing. It's about perception. When judges, who have such enormous power over people's lives, seem hesitant to be open about their own financial situation.
It just fuels suspicion, right?
Inevitably, people aren't asking for, their credit card statements. They're asking for a basic level of transparency about assets to ensure there are no conflicts of interest, to ensure financial integrity.
Okay, let's get into that. Why does asset disclosure matter so much for judges specifically? Fundamentally, it comes down to the immense power they wield. They decide major cases, interpret laws, resolve disputes sometimes involving huge sums of money, even make decisions about liberty.
Life and death, sometimes.
Absolutely. When you hold that kind of power, the public needs absolute confidence that your decisions are based purely on law and fact, not swayed by personal financial gain or hidden interests.
That makes total sense. It's like, if you hire a babysitter, you want to know they're trustworthy.
Yeah.
You check references.
Right.
Judges are kind of babysitting justice itself. The principle feels similar.
A good analogy.
Yeah.
Think of asset disclosures as a sort of financial x-ray. It helps show if a judge's wealth matches their known income sources, like their salary. Or if there's suddenly, a beach villa in Goa that seems hard to explain on a judge's paycheck.
Raises a red flag.
It raises questions that need answering to maintain that public faith.
And what really stands out is the comparison with others in power. In India, elected officials, MPs, MLAs, even candidates running for office, they've had to declare their assets publicly since, 2002, 2003?
That's right. For over 2 decades now.
So why the exemption for judges? It feels inconsistent. Like everyone else has to eat their vegetables, but one group gets to stick to ice cream.
That inconsistency is a major point in this whole debate. And mandatory disclosures, remember, aren't just about catching bad behavior after the fact. They're primarily about building trust proactively. Voluntary disclosure is nice. It signals nothing to hide.
But mandatory is different.
Mandatory sends a much stronger institutional message. It says, this is the standard we all adhere to.
I recall reading somewhere, maybe Advocate Rika Agarwal said it, that judges are often seen as almost godlike figures in court. And
Mm,
because of that high status, the public really needs assurance they aren't hiding something significant.
mm.
They use the phrase a golden chariot.
Yeah, that captures the public expectation perfectly. That level of reverence comes with immense responsibility. But the current voluntary system, it's just not delivering that consistent assurance.
It's like asking your teenager nicely to tidy their room versus having actual house rules.
Yeah,
The results are, well, unpredictable.
exactly. Very hit or miss. And, looking globally, this idea isn't some radical, out there concept unique to India.
Right. Other countries do this.
No, absolutely. Many countries have established systems. In the U.S., federal judges, including the Supreme Court justices, have had required annual public financial disclosures since 1978.
Since the 70s.
Yeah. Canada has specific laws requiring judges to declare assets and financial interests. Even Australia, which relies more on principles than hard law at the federal level, strongly encourages voluntary disclosure precisely to avoid conflicts.
So the key takeaway from these places seems to be that transparency actually strengthens judicial independence rather than weakening it.
That's the crucial point. It deters improper financial behavior, removes potential conflicts before they arise. In a country like India, where, let's be honest, corruption has been a persistent challenge, almost like that stubborn pickle-stained grandma left.
Right.
You need strong deterrents, especially for the judiciary.
Yeah.
A World Bank report from 2016 found 150 countries had mandatory asset declaration systems for judges.
150. Wow.
And the general finding was that public disclosure, when balanced right, doesn't violate privacy in a way that outweighs the public interest in preventing corruption. If a country like Ukraine, grappling with its own serious corruption issues, can implement this.
Then surely India can figure it out too.
You'd think so.
So let's trace India's own journey on this. It hasn't been a straight line, has it?
Not at all. It's
Yeah.
been more like a long and winding road with lots of stops and starts. A real tussle over transparency. Goes back to 1997 under Chief Justice J.S. Verma.
Okay.
The Supreme Court passed a resolution asking judges to declare assets. But crucially, it was confidential, only for the Chief Justice's eyes.
Like a secret handshake deal. Keep it in the club.
Pretty much. Hidden from public view. Then, jump to 2007. An RTI activist files a query.
Right to information.
Yes. And it revealed two things. One, that 1997 resolution wasn't even being consistently followed. And two, the Supreme Court's official stance was that this asset information was personal.
Personal information, even though they're public officials.
That was the stance. And it kicked off this huge legal battle that dragged on for over 10 years.
So it really does feel like the judiciary was kind of playing hide and seek with the public for decades on this.
You could definitely see why people might feel that way. That legal fight finally led to a 2019 Supreme Court ruling, which, yes, agreed some transparency was needed under RTI, but it still felt like they were keeping the full picture under wraps.
And somewhere in there, that 2009 resolution made disclosure voluntary.
Right, which led to the patchy compliance we see today. Spotty, like a Dalmatian, someone said.
Huh. Okay. And meanwhile, you had some high courts actually arguing there was no public interest in knowing about judges' assets.
Yes, the Gujarat High Court, for instance, took that line, which, when you think about the millions of litigants waiting, often for years, for justice, it feels jarringly out of touch.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to that 2025 incident with Justice Varma, the burnt currency reports. That felt like maybe a final straw moment.
It certainly amplified the calls for action, put a huge spotlight back on these fundamental questions of integrity and accountability.
Leading to the April 1, 2025 resolution. Judges declare to the Chief Justice with an option to make it public.
It's a step, an acknowledgement, but it still relies on that voluntary aspect for public disclosure, without a proper law making it mandatory for all judges, Supreme Court, High Courts, right down to the district level.
It feels incomplete, like a Band-Aid on a much bigger issue.
Exactly. It
Right.
doesn't create that uniform standard of transparency that seems necessary.
So the core argument is that voluntary disclosure just hasn't cut it, and likely won't.
That's what the evidence suggests, and what many experts argue. People like Sandeep Parekh have been very clear. This shouldn't rely on the goodwill or discretion of individual judges. It needs to be mandated by law.
And it's not just commentators saying this.
No, even a parliamentary standing committee has backed the idea of mandatory disclosure through legislation. There's a growing consensus outside the judiciary itself.
Okay, so if we had mandatory disclosure, what would be the key benefits? What would change?
Well, four main things, I think. First, consistency. A law means every single judge, top to bottom, has to comply. No more of this patchwork approach where some high courts like Kerala or Delhi are relatively more open than others.
Right, a level playing field.
Second, deterrence. Knowing your finances are open to scrutiny makes it much less likely that a judge would accept improper benefits or accumulate wealth they can't explain. It's like knowing the teacher will check your homework, you're less likely to cut corners.
Makes sense.
Third, and maybe most importantly, public confidence. A mandatory system is a powerful signal from the judiciary itself that it's committed to accountability. It's like a warm hug from the system, reassuring people it's on their side, it's clean.
Rebuilding that trust we talked about.
Precisely. And fourth, global standards. It brings India in line with what many other established democracies do. It helps India walk the talk on transparency and good governance on the international stage.
And this transparency idea isn't just about assets, is it? You mentioned qualitative transparency earlier.
Right. That's another layer suggested by people like Perec. It's about operational data. Things like how quickly do judges dispose of cases? What kinds of cases are they handling? How long are cases typically pending before a particular judge or court?
So data that could actually help explain why, say, my cousin's property dispute has been stuck since the days of, I don't know, Nokia phones.
Exactly. It could help pinpoint bottlenecks in the system, show where things are getting clogged up, and inform actual reforms to speed things up.
Now, we do need to address the arguments against this. The main one seems to be privacy. Judges worry about their safety, harassment, maybe even extortion if financial details are out there.
And that's a fair point. It's a legitimate concern. Nobody wants their home address linked to their bank balance publicly available for anyone to see.
Yeah.
But it has to be weighed against the nature of their role. Judges are public servants. They're paid by us, the taxpayers. They wield enormous state power. With that comes a higher degree of expected scrutiny than for, say, a private citizen.
And if politicians and top bureaucrats manage it.
That's the counterargument. If they can navigate the security and privacy concerns that come with public asset disclosure, then it suggests mechanisms can be found for judges too.
So it's not necessarily all or nothing. There could be ways to balance transparency and privacy.
Absolutely. The discussion often includes ideas like perhaps anonymizing certain sensitive details like specific account numbers or addresses, while still disclosing the nature and value of assets. Or maybe having disclosures go to an independent body that reviews them and flags potential issues without every single detail being plastered online for all time.
Has the Supreme Court itself dealt with balancing transparency and privacy before?
Yes, they have. Look at the Swapnil Tripathi case in 2018, dealing with live streaming court proceedings. They laid out guidelines specifically to balance the public's right to know with the privacy concerns of litigants. So the principle of finding a workable balance is definitely there.
What about the fear of media sensationalism? You know, a headline screaming, "Judge owns 3 Ferraris," when it was actually 3 vintage Fiats.
That's always a risk with public data. But again, potential solutions exist. The Supreme Court could issue guidelines on what gets disclosed and maybe even how it should be reported, focusing on facts and context. It's not rocket science, really. It's just about setting clear rules for responsible governance and information sharing.
The resistance, though, sometimes feels, well, it feels like the judiciary is like a grumpy cat refusing to leave its cozy blanket of opacity.
Ah, that's one way to put it. Or like they're saying, trust us, we're fine behind these closed doors. But the public, especially after incidents and delays, isn't really buying that anymore.
And the hypocrisy angle? Demanding transparency from others?
Yeah, that comes up too. The judiciary often pushes for openness from politicians regarding assets, or in investigating things like, remember the Delhi High Court blast in 2011? They wanted open probes. But when the lens turns on them,
it feels like a different standard applies. Do their gavels risk seeming, I don't know, made of hypocrisy sometimes?
that's the perception risk they face if this isn't addressed comprehensively.
Okay, stepping back then. Asset disclosure seems crucial, but it's clearly just one piece of a bigger puzzle, right? The judiciary needs more than just this one change. Feels like it needs a full makeover.
It's a serious update, yeah. Like a 90s Bollywood hero finally getting a modern haircut.
Huh. Okay, so what else needs that transparency treatment?
Well, judicial appointments are a huge one. The collegium system, where judges basically appoint other judges, is famously opaque, often described as being as transparent as a brick wall.
And then you get those reports, like in May 2025, that 14 out of 221 recent high court appointees were related to sitting judges.
Exactly. That kind of thing immediately raises questions about nepotism versus merit. We need a much more transparent, potentially criteria-based process for how judges get selected.
Makes sense. What else?
Case pendency. The numbers are just staggering. You mentioned over 46 million cases stuck in district courts in 2025. Compare that to maybe 50, 500 or so in the Supreme Court.
It's like comparing a tsunami to a kiddie pool. The problem is overwhelming at the lower levels.
Monumental. Publishing data on delays, maybe even basic judge performance metrics, could finally show us where the system is clogged and why your cousin's case is still waiting.
And what about when things go wrong? Misconduct.
That's another black box. The current in-house procedure, dating back to 1999, is very internal, very secretive. A complaint goes to the Chief Justice, maybe a committee of judges looks into it, but the outcome, rarely made public.
Unlike systems elsewhere.
Right. In the UK, for example, they have a much more transparent, independent body to handle complaints against judges. India needs something similar, an independent mechanism, not just judges investigating judges behind closed doors.
And technology. You mentioned moving beyond dusty files.
Absolutely. Embracing technology fully. Online case management, virtual hearings, some high courts are doing well, but it needs to be universal, efficient, and accessible. Moving from the age of crumbling paper files into the digital age properly.
Okay, so if we were to map out a road ahead, what would the key steps be for a more transparent judiciary? It sounds like a big task.
It is, but not impossible. First, legislative action is key. Pass a comprehensive judicial accountability law. That's the foundation. It needs to mandate asset disclosures for all judges right down to the district level.
And set up that independent body you mentioned.
Yes. Establish an independent oversight body for handling complaints and ensuring compliance with transparency norms. Past attempts at such laws have failed, but the need feels more urgent now.
And the specifics of disclosure.
Codify it. Annual mandatory disclosures. Clear rules on what needs to be declared, maybe assets above a certain threshold, say 10 lakh rupees, just as an example.
And make it accessible.
Fully embrace technology. Publish the mandated disclosures online with those privacy safeguards we've talked about. Publish case pendency data, disposal rates, maybe even anonymize appointment rationale. Make it user-friendly so citizens can actually track things. Imagine tracking your case status like an Amazon package.
That would be revolutionary. And engaging the public.
Crucial. Town halls, workshops, educational materials to explain how the judiciary works and why transparency matters. Helps build understanding and counters misinformation or conspiracy theories.
And learning from others.
Definitely. With the U.S., Canada, other places, adapt best practices. No need to completely reinvent the wheel here.
Okay, let's bring this right back to the listener. Why does any of this asset disclosure, pendency data, appointment reform, why does it matter to you, whether you're a tea seller or a CEO?
Because the judiciary is the ultimate safety net. It's the backbone of democracy. It's where you go when your rights are violated, when you need a fair resolution. If that institution seems compromised, slow, or opaque.
It shakes your faith in the whole system.
Exactly. Every delay, every unanswered question about integrity, every whisper of corruption erodes that fundamental trust, and it has real-world consequences.
Like that case of Umar Khalid reported in May 2025, detained for nearly 5 years without trial.
That's a stark example. Regardless of the specifics of any single case, such extreme delays show how a system struggling with efficiency and perhaps opacity can impact fundamental liberty. A transparent, accountable, and efficient judiciary is less likely to let things drag on for years and years. Justice delayed is justice denied, right?
Absolutely. And the benefits go beyond individual cases.
For sure. A judiciary seen as transparent and reliable strengthens India's image globally. It makes the country more attractive for investment. It also sets a powerful example for transparency in other public institutions. If the highest court demands openness but isn't fully open itself, well, it sends a mixed message.
It feels like the Indian judiciary really is at a critical point then. Mandatory asset disclosure isn't about pointing fingers at judges.
Not at all. It's about affirming the integrity of the vast majority. It's a way to demonstrate clearly and publicly that the system is upright, reliable, and accountable to the people it serves.
This is a national conversation that affects everyone.
It absolutely is. And the call to action that comes out of all this is really for everyone listening. Demand change. Talk about this issue. Write about it. Tweet about it. Let policymakers know this matters. The judiciary exists for the people. It's not supposed to be above them.
And maybe the final thought to leave you with, the challenge that hangs in the air after looking at all this, is directed squarely at the judiciary itself. It's time. Open those vaults, metaphorically speaking. Show everyone there's nothing to hide financially that could compromise justice. Because in the end, in the court of public opinion, transparency is the only verdict that truly matters. What will that final verdict look like? That's the question we need answered.